Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you to the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. I will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you'll purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you. So relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today, I have the very great honor of introducing Julia Cimafiejeva, Valzhyna Mort, Hanif Abdurraqib, and Will Evans here to discuss and celebrate the release of Motherfield. Julia Cimafiejeva is a Belarusian writer and translator. She is the author of 4 poetry collections in Belarusian and a documentary book, Minsk Diary. Her work has been translated into many languages and has appeared in different projects, anthologies, and magazines. Motherfield is her first collection to be available in English. She currently lives in exile. Valzhyna Mort is the author of 3 poetry collections, most recently Music for the Dead and Resurrected, named one of the best poetry books of 2020 by the New York Times, and the winner of the International Griffin Poetry Prize and the UNT Rilke Prize. Her 2 previous collections are Factory of Tears and Collected Body. She is a recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the American Academy in Rome, and the Lannan Foundation, among others. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. He is the author of multiple award-winning and New York Times bestselling books, including poetry collections, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, and A Fortune for Your Disaster, and nonfiction collections, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, Go Ahead in the Rain, A Tribe Called Quest, and A Little Devil in America. And today's moderator, Shook, is unable to join us today because storms have knocked out their power, but in their place, we are pleased to have Will Evans, founder and publisher at Deep Vellum. I'm so thrilled to have them here together in conversation. Now, Julia, Valzhyna, Hanif, and Will.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this amazing event today with 3 astounding artists, right? And put on by one of the best bookstores in America, which means the whole world, right? To be a part of this amazing series, the Transnational Reading Series, which is one of the just premier literary events in the country, and everything that I found at Deep Vellum to be a part of many, many moons ago. And so to get ready for this event, oh, and by the way, my internet is very bad. And so if at any point you can't hear me, Pierce, send me a text, and everyone else just go on without me, because I keep getting warnings saying my internet connection is unstable. I'm in Mexico City at the moment. I'm actually staying in a hotel right behind the Cathedral of Mexico. It's a very beautiful space, but the internet gods are not smiling upon me at the moment. But I went back and I revisited the first email Valzhyna sent me about this project to get ready for it. And it reminds me again of the great joy it brings me to get to work on this project. And in it, Valzhyna let me know a little bit about Julia's work as a Belarusian writer and as someone who engages both the artistic and the political, and saying that that's something that Deep Vellum is into and that it would be a perfect collection for us. And Valzhyna was absolutely right. The intersection sort of the humanities and society, the mixture of art as social practice is something that we really believe in. It's what I was trained in as a student of Russian literature for many years. But unlike most students of Russian literature, when I was getting a master's degree, I started asking the question of all the great Russian writers who still remain untranslated, right? Which is, why are these books untranslated? And if that's a problem, is it also a problem for writers in Belarus and Ukraine? And the answer is, of course, and in a much worse way. And so Deep Vellum was founded to try to fill in those gaps, to find what's missing in our society, in our English reading world, our parochial, tiny world of the English language, and to see what's missing so that we could add to it in our understanding of the world, and to foster the conversations between people, readers and writers, and then also cultures writ large. And so Valzhyna said something in this pitch too that I really loved, which was about how Julia was a poet, writing about growing up in a small town in Belarus, writing about how Chernobyl shaped her childhood, about language, foreign languages in particular, as her ticket out of rural post-Soviet dread. That really resonated with me because I'm a kid from North Carolina, I'm from a small town, and foreign languages and reading books in translation is part of my ticket out of Southern white boy, limited landscape for intellectual thought dread as well. And so it brought me great joy when Valzhyna sent this. And as you heard Pierce say in her introduction, Valzhyna is an amazing poet. And she said she was going to be co-translating it with Hanif. And Hanif is someone I've known for years as a great writer. Of course, fell in love with his work that $2 Radio published. And before Valzhyna wrote us, we had just hosted Hanif for the Tribe Called Quest book launched at our bookstore in Dallas. And so when Valzhyna pitched this, it felt like something that our entire organization was birthed to publish. And so that is a long-winded introduction to say, again, that this is the joy of being a publisher, is to take something that existed in a language that I don't know, Belarusian, and to bring it to readers around the world in a language that we do know, which for us is English. And so thank you all for being here today. And I want to sort of cede the floor to an artist before we ever begin any conversation. So Julia, would you like to take it away and read a poem for us?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And of course, thank you, Will, for taking my book and publishing it, my first English language book. And thank you, Valzhyna and Hanif, for making the translation possible and for readers here, readers in the US. Yeah, maybe I'll start. I start with the poem, The Stone of Fear. That was actually, this book has poems that were written starting in 2012, and maybe the last poem was written in 2021 that was included in this book. And I will start with the one that was written in 2020, the year that had crucial influence on me. Now I'm living in Graz together with my husband and writer Algert Bakharevich. We are writers in exile here, and we're going to leave that place. And we're here because in 2020, we had presidential elections that were falsificated, and we decided to leave the country. And that was the true decision, as now in Belarus we have only officially we have 1,500 people as political prisoners. And this poem was written just before these events in summer 2020. I will read in Belarusian, and Valzhyna will read the translation. Камінь страху. Не страшно. Я ўрэшце дома. Я атрымала ў спадчыну свой страх, сямейную рэліквію, каштоўны камень, які перадаецца ад пакалення да пакалення. Наш круглы радавы валун, некалі скрадзены з панскага поля. Камень не мае рота, не здольны ні крыкнуць, ні сказаць. Ён бяспамятны, заўжды ў зародку, усё, што ён умее, марудна і няўмольна расці. Мы кормім камень па чарзе, праз доўгую пупавіну роду, прабабулі, прадзядулі, дзядулі, бабулі, маці з бацькам. А вось і я вырасла. Цяпер моя чарга. Правілы догляду простыя. Спачатку ты носіш камень на сэрцы. Ён п'е твою кроў і смокча жыццёвыя сокі, камень адвучыць цябе дыхаць на поўныя грудзі. Потым дай камень узняцца вышэй, зручна захраснуць у горле, цадзіць твае словы, камень адвучыць цябе, гавары тое, што хочаш. І вось страх выбіраецца вонкі, абвіваецца каменная пупавіна вакол шыі, вешаецца табе на грудзі твая вечная процівага. Ах, якая прыгажосць! Гэта у вас ад бабулі? Так. Вы ж толькі яго беражыце? Абавязкова.
The Stone of Fear. I'm scared. I'm home. I have been handed down a trust fund of fear, a family heirloom passed generation to generation. Our round family stone stolen from the landlord's field. This stone has no mouth. It can neither scream nor talk. This stone has no memory, an eternally slow-growing embryo. One by one, we feed this stone. Great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers, grandfathers and grandmothers, mothers and fathers. Now that I'm grown, it's my turn. The rules of nursing the stone are simple. 1. Use the stone to make your heart heavy. The stone will help you unlearn how to breathe with a full chest. 2. Let the stone rise until it's stuck in your throat, sucking on your words. The stone will help you unlearn how to say what needs to be said. 3. Watch the fear emerge, wrapped in the umbilical stone around your neck, hung with the umbilical stone on your chest, your eternal counterweight. How pretty. Is this your grandma's? Yes. Take good care of it. Always.
Shall I go on reading another poem? So another poem is called 1986, and it's also part of my family story. I was born in a village very close to the little town of Chernobyl, where atomic station was built, and in 1986 there was a catastrophe. I hope many of you know about that, and my family and me were evacuated from that zone, and now it's a closed area for visitors, of course. There is a Falesia radiological something, and only once a year, everyone, even a foreigner, can get a permission to go to that area. It's a day when Belarusians go to the cemeteries there, now, and also my parents and my family and me went there as well. We visited this place for many years, and I would say that cemeteries are the liveliest place there. With on the one hand, it's clean and all these tombs are cleaned, and also it's a place where people who left these villages meet together. They come from many cities and also from many countries. And just, I guess that this poem needs some commentary. 1986. Мы не смогли забрать вас с собою, безногие наши домы. Не смогли узвалить вас на плечи и вынести на себе свежелзараны, городы, могилки. Мы не здолели выкопать с кореннем ваши крыжи и пересадить их у чистую глебу. Яблоневые сады, стулівши, белоружовые повеки, вы замокли з надеей, чакаючи на наши вертайні, каліцезієм оплодненные, чырванню налилися ваши завязи, только здичелые сголодалые кошки по зорках вернулись назад, але яблока у ваших яны все равно не ели. Яблоки опадали и гнили, крыжи высыхали без наших слез, городы заблытывались в пустозелье, замирали. А наши домы старели. Домы губляли от гора розум и память. Чужие люди вырвались с веками дошки подлоги, сняли со стен пыльные диваны с паулинами, скрали все наши хворые речи, які ніхто не мог вылечить, речи, якія самі маўчалі про свою хваробу, речи, без якіх наши домы зморшчыліся і шчаўрэлі. Праз много гадоў мы приехали ў гости, только могілкавыя крыжы помахали нам вышываным ашмоццем старых рушнікоў. Ни домы, ни городы, ни яблони нас не признали. И як не упрошвали наши добрые продки. Це своїх, свіжоприбраних могил. Ні доми, ні городи, ні яблуні нам нічого не дарували.
"1986. We couldn't take you with us, our legless houses. We couldn't carry you out on our shoulders, our freshly plowed fields, our graves we couldn't dig out, the deep roots of your crosses in order to transplant them into new soil. Apple gardens, closed pink white eyelids, silent, hoping for our return. When, impregnated with cesium, your buds grew red, starved feral cats followed the stars back home but didn't touch your fruit. Apples fell and rotted, thirsty for our tears, crosses dried up, gardens got lost in the weeds and grew silent. Our houses aged, losing their minds and memories. Strangers tore out the floor, took down from the walls our dusty carpets, stole all of our sick belongings, sick, uncurable belongings, things silent about their sickness. When after many years we came back for a visit, our cemetery crosses waved at us with the rags of their embroidered cowls. Neither houses, nor gardens, nor apple trees recognized us. No matter how hard our forgiving dead begged them from their freshly cleaned graves, neither houses, nor gardens, nor apple trees forgave us.
This is like, it's amazing to see the co-translation here, right? The fact that we have Hanif and Valzhyna working together to bring this in, something I'm going to get to in the Q&A, but I just wanted to throw my voice in there right now and to remind everyone listening, drop a question in the chat, anything. We'll try to get to it, and if we don't, we'll get to it later in life. Time is going. And I really just want to sort of keep the flow going. I'm really personally enjoying this, so Julia wanted to do another. We have a couple more to go, and I like the idea of doing all the art and then the questions rather than interrupting the flow and go. But Julia, you poke me if you think that's not true. Okay. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Will. Then I will go on with another poem. In Belarusian, it's called Admonist. In English, it's called Negative Linguistic Capability. It's a poem about language. And language is one of the, I would say, main topics of this book, of course. On the one hand, it's because I'm also a translator. I translate literature, poetry, and prose into English language, from English into Belarusian, from German, from sometimes from Portuguese, or even Shumer language. I once translated. But on the other hand, language is a very painful issue for Belarusians, and for Belarusian authors as well, as almost all the authors, writers, and poets, doesn't matter, who write now in Belarusian language, learned that language. That was not our mother tongue. Like, for example, Valzhyna had a very good essay on that, about her languages also, when language is also her topic. So there is just I'm making it myself. Yes, all these comments. Адмоўнасць. Тая мова, на якой я могу говорить, это не моя мова. А тая, на якой хочу гаварыць, не ўкладаецца ў словы, якія я ведаю, не змяшчаю вобразы, якія я бачу. Для маёй мовы няма слоўнікаў, для яе не сфармулявана правілаў. Гэта мова для чытання самой сабе, мова для чытання з памылкамі, бо праверыць няма каму. Пісаць на ёй я не змагу ніколі. Калі ты чытаеш гэты верш, ты не мой чытач.
Negative linguistic capability. The language I can speak is not my language. The language I wish to speak isn't contained in words I know, isn't contained in images I see. For my language, there are no dictionaries, no agreed upon rules. It's a language for reading my own self, language for reading with mistakes, because there is no one to correct me. I will never write in this language. If you're reading this poem, you're not my reader.
And I go on, and another poem that I'm going to read will be in English. So that's my first work written in English. My European poem. This poem should be written in English. This poem should be written in German. This poem should be written in French and Swedish and Spanish, my adorable Norwegian. Maybe in Finnish, Danish and Dutch. Baltic languages should decide for themselves. No Belarusian version for the poem, no Russian version for the poem, no Ukrainian version for the poem. The rest take your choice. This poem should be written in the languages of human rights organizations, of those multiple expressed concerns by European politicians. So, shall I get used to the thought that I could be taken to prison by the man wearing black, by the man in plain clothes, by the man with 4 fat letters on their fat black backs? Otherwise, my country won't gain any freedom, and it could not work anyway, as usual. I'd not take lightly that I could be beaten and ultimately found guilty because they would say I cried anti-state slogans like freedom or release all political prisoners, though I would not need to cry these words out loud in order to be arrested or beaten. I won't have to cry anything. I won't have to do anything, just stand silently, just be. I know I have to get used to that thought just in case, because it's so likely to happen. Oh my, I haven't yet saved those numbers to contact in the case of detention. I can't say that in Belarusian. I can't say that in Russian. I can't say that in Ukrainian, only in English. I'm afraid. Only in German, ich habe Angst. Only in Norwegian, jag är rädd. That's enough. For all the variants, please use Google Translate. The translation should be more or less accurate. These are not those strange Eastern European languages with their funny Cyrillic letters. I'm afraid, like you would be in my place if you lived in a country that is not free, where they had the same president for 27 years. Oh my God, more than 2/3 of my life I've spent under the power of a madman whom I've never voted for. Sorry, it's a long poem. Because it's a long story, I spent more than 2/3 of my life under the power of the man I've never voted for, who harassed and suppressed and killed, they say. And when I come to the literary festivals abroad, and when I speak English, I try to tell the complicated history of my country when I'm asked, as if I'm another person, as if I'm like all those European poets and writers who do not have to get used to the thought that I could be arrested and beaten for the sake of their country's freedom. As if my ugly history is just a harsh story that I can easily cut from the anthology of modern European short stories because it's too long and too dull. When I tell it in English, I want to pretend that I'm you, that I don't have that painful experience of constant protesting and constant failing, that nasty feeling of frustration and dismay. I want to pretend that I have a hope, because when I tell it in Belarusian, I realize, we all realize, there is none. So forgive me my nagging in a half-broken English, my Eastern European never-ending complaints as having read the books you've read. I still want to have a hope. I still believe I have a right for a hope, that beaten hope that builds its nest on my roof and sings songs in Belarusian, not in Russian. The 5th of August, 2020. And if we go on, then another poem from 2020. It's called They Have Me in English, in Hanif's translation. And it's also part of my personal story. My brother was taken to prison during one of the protests in 2020. Happily, he was released 2 days later, but then in 2021, He was arrested again, together with his wife and their friends, musicians. They were arrested for playing music during the protests in 2020, and they got 1.5 years of imprisonment for this crime, for playing music with their bagpipes and guitars and so on and so forth. But now he is free, so they served their term till the very end. Забралі. У чорную шчыліну бетоннага плота спрабую разгледзець насаты профіль мучыцеля. Гэта Дзяржынскі вас там дзяржыць у бараўлянскім аддзеле міліцыі, бязрукі Дзяржынскі за востраным носам падпісвае вам пратаколы і адпраўляе з рукамі за спінай у кайданках ці сцяжках за плоту не бачна, у аўтазак, белы і правільны, як халадзільнік. Забралі. І вось мы стаім, мы чакаем па гэты бок плота. Мы сочым як дзеці, у шчыліну, за катам каменным, за развалістаю паходкай кіроўцы, за бліскучымі шлемамі касманаўтаў у святле аранжавай лямпачкі. Міліцэйская лямпачка таксама проста выконвае загад. Лямпачка таксама не можа аслухацца каманды «выкл», лямпачка прыняла прысягу на вернасць народу Рэспублікі Беларусь і будзе свяціць або не свяціць, як загадае ёй галоўнакамандуючы. Лысаваты начальнік у цемры, падобны да чалавека, махае белым сцяжком з імёнамі нашых родных. Отойдите подальше от забора. Вы замедляете оформление, вы мешаете работать. Их сегодня никто не выпустит, все поедут на Жодина. За плотом ухвально шчырыцца бюст, носом складаючы протоколы. Днем я побачила в шчыліну. Гэта не Фелікс Дзяржынскі, гэта таварыш Фрунзе. Один хер.
They have me. Through a small opening in a concrete fence, I study the shape of the tyrant's nose. Is it Dzierżyński who guards you in this remote police station? Armless Dzierżyński with a sharpened nose signs protocols, fixes your hands at your back with handcuffs or cable ties I cannot tell from behind the fence, sends you into a white police van as perfect as a refrigerator. They have me. Now we stand. We wait on this side of the fence. Like children, we watch through an opening. The torturer made of stone, the waddle of a police van driver, the shiny space helmets and the light of an orange bulb. All the police bulb knows is to follow orders. The bulb cannot disobey. Bulb took an oath to serve the people of the Republic of Belarus and will shine or not shine as the commander-in-chief orders. Police chief cuts the dark with a paper flag with the names of our relatives. The police chief says, move away from the fence. You slow down the process of documentation. You disrupt my work. They aren't going to be released. They will be transferred further. Through the fence, Bust approvingly smiles. When daylight came, I saw it is not Felix Dzierżyński. It's comrade Michael Frunze, a different man, same crime.
Oh, try to mute myself. Another poem will be Self-Portrait as an Avocado Seed. Another true story that happened to me. Writers know when they come to some residence, of course, it's not their home. And what I like about my home, about my flat in Belarus, in Minsk, is plants. I had a lot of plants. I like growing up. Is it an avocado over you, Will? No?
No, but it looks like one. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like.
This is a fiddle leaf fig. It's a beautiful, beautiful tree. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I came to Graz, one of the first things that I did, I grew several trees from seeds of avocado. Аўтарпартрэт у выглядзе костачкі авакада. Чым большая костачка, тым хутчэй яна прарасце. Я чытала парады, першым уткнуць, 3 зубачысткі ў цвярдыню яе сцягна, першым заглыбіць шчыльны каўчэг зярняці у шклянку з вадой. З раніцы раптам лупіна лопнула. Разламалася мясістая костачка, быццам сталі насупраць адзін аднаго 2 сусветы. Іх можна было б назваць тут і там, захад і ўсход, чужое і роднае, урэшце яны і мы. Можна было б, калі б не корань, што пачынае расці між 2 палавінак, калі б не сцябліны, маленькая галава, прыўзнятая над вадой. Глядзі, як выпаўзае хтосьці з каўчэгу у пошуках новай зямлі. Гэта я.
Self-portrait is an avocado seed. The larger the avocado seed, the sooner it will sprout. I researched the growing tips before I stabbed 3 toothpicks into its firm thigh. Before I lowered an arc sealed chemetically into a glass of water, by the morning, the shell is cracked, the fleshy seed split in 2, as if 2 worlds have come to a face-off. I could call them here and there, west and east, mine and not mine, and finally, us and them. One could have, if not for the root that shoots and grows between the 2 halves, if not for the small head of a sprout raised over the water. Look, somebody crawls out of the ark in search of a new land. It's me.
And the last piece we're going to read, it will be only in English, and it will be part of my so-called protest diary, or Minsk diary, as I call it before. It will be how my husband and I took part in the protest I have already mentioned. So October 11, 2020. We have to be on alert all the time. We have already been running today with others on the wet grass and muddy tracks in the old central neighborhood. It felt like a cheap horror movie or a bad dream. Now we're hiding in a big mall, Corona. Under the dazzling lights of the shopping center, I recover my breath and phone my brother, till on the news. While calling, I look at the bright and colorful advertisements with huge half-naked women, relaxed and smiling. Their gazes invite us to stay in this gleaming, dry and safe paradise, to smell perfumes, to order pizza, or at least to dry off. But we uninterestedly walk through the mall to the door on the opposite side and find ourselves in front of the immense demonstration marching along. We're walking on the roadway on Pushkin Avenue when I begin to sense something sinister in the air. We've marched enough. You are sick, we've gotten soaked through, maybe it's time to go home. We climb over the metal fence that divides the road into 2 lanes. It's quite low. You just have to lift your leg, but your jeans are too tight. You could tear them. Crossing the lane, I suddenly look back and see that the demonstrators are running from the roadway into the courtyards. We run and everybody around us runs. Young and old, women and men, workers and students, doctors and programmers. It doesn't matter who you are. The most important thing is how fast you can run from the police, across the playgrounds, across the parking lots, between the apartment blocks with their doorways opened by compassionate dwellers who invite strangers inside their flats. Even a small apartment can become a shelter for up to 30 people. It reminds me of the Second World War stories about saving Jews. But you and I don't need to hide and find shelter now. We need to get home. When it seems that the danger is over, and at last we can catch our breath, Behind the trees, we notice another group of the protesters running towards us, and we start running again. Suddenly you stop. You cannot run anymore. We have to hide somewhere, and you suggest a grocery store. We enter quickly, take a shopping basket, and stop in the bread section as if we were normal customers. It's clear that we are not. We are soaking wet, water dripping from our hair, our faces red from running, our eyes, the wild eyes of animals. We're trying to regulate our breathing over the bread loaves. I dry my face and hair with a paper napkin. Bending over the refrigerator full of dumplings, I try to calm down. There are no more police inside, just customers wandering among the food shelves or demonstrators pretending to be customers, who knows. Finally, holding a shopping basket with wine and food for dinner, we go to the cashier. I have my backpack on, and we usually try to be ecological, refusing the plastic bag, but not this time. This time, we need an alibi. Through the store windows, we see that people are still moshing. The store manager has already closed the door and is shouting at anyone twitching the handle from the outside. "Go away," she cries at them, and "We are closed." She lets us out and closes the glass door behind our backs. Heading home, you suggest not to go through the courtyards, as there could be a police ambush waiting for the protesters. On Pushkin Avenue, we walk as slowly and calmly as we can, pretending to be a young family. You are holding a white plastic bag full of groceries, and I press close to you. Military vehicles leisurely drive by. At home, we learned that 2 Belarusian philosophers, a young family like us, have been detained today near Nemiga Street.
Julia, thank you. I want to give everybody a quick round of applause, poet style. We can snap like the old school. Thank you, you three. That was amazing. Take a deep breath, drink some water, some coffee, whatever it may be. My first question is for you, Julia. And then I have a question for Valzhyna and Hanif. So first question, Julia, is it's a two-parter. And the first part is going to feed into another question later, but that is that you wrote the Protest Diary in English, right? And you wrote your European poem that you read in English, and you read to us in English. And so I wanted to ask you how your sort of creative process worked for your writing in English, as opposed to what you write in Belarusian originally. And then the second part is, at what point did you decide to include this Protest Diary in this book of poems? Because aesthetically they're separate, but as a whole, it becomes a very different work. I mean, I think it's an extraordinarily strong work, and it really appealed to me when Valzhyna originally told me about it. And so could you tell us a little bit about sort of your English language process and how the Protest Diary came to be a part of this poetry book?
Thank you, Will, for the question. I also saw one question in questions and answers section about writing in English. So, well, my European poem was the first poem I wrote in English, and my first text written in English. And, you know, it was written just 4 days before the elections, when in Belarus, we saw that something sinister was coming. A lot of people have been detained. 2 presidential candidates have been arrested already, but the world was silent. Nothing was in the news about that, as if nothing was happening. And my European poem was like a cry for help. And it was written for my Facebook friends. I have a lot of Facebook friends in different countries, not only in English-speaking countries, mostly in non-English speaking countries like Sweden, for example, or Norway, or Germany, for example. In this poem, I write that I do not want to have this poem be written in Belarusian or Russian or Ukrainian. I mean here that at that moment, we did not, I mean, in August 2020, we didn't felt so much hope for what could happen. And this English language, the language of, let's say, of a big empire, of winners, as Belarusians are used to think about sense of losers. This language and this, it was like a game, I don't know, I was acting, pretending to be someone, and it gave me an opportunity to imagine that Belarusians can have this hope, that can have this changes for democratic changes in the country. And then as for the diary, it's another kind of story, and Valzhyna has something to do with it as well. Thank you, Valzhyna, my angel. So in September or in October 2020, Valzhyna wrote to me and said, there is an editor in Financial Times wants a piece about Belarusian protests. Maybe you could write that, and it should be in English. And so first I refused, but then I decided, why not? I want to describe all these things. They were living in me. It was like I wanted to say something about the protest. And so there was one text that is the 1st of October here. And then from that very text, this whole diary grew. And it has been translated into several languages: Swedish, German, Lithuanian language, Norwegian, and here the edited version, of course. So it was in this case, English language gave me an opportunity to feel the distance from what was going on at that moment in Belarus. It made my writing and my experience not so painful for me. So there was also this, I was writing like in gloves of the English language, let's say. So, and of course, it's much easier to find a translator from the English language than from the Belarusian language, you know. We always have this problem with lack of translators. For example, in Germany, even in Germany, we have only 2 or 3 translators from the Belarusian language.
Well, that's a perfect bridge to my next question, which has to do with this amazing translation itself. And when Valzhyna first wrote me, she said, here's a beautiful Belarusian book I think you'd be very into, and I will co-translate it with Hanif Abdurraqib. And I said, wait, hold on, does Hanif know Belarusian? And I didn't know it all along. And she laughed and she said, no, we have a collaborative process. And so I wanted to ask Valzhyna and Hanif about your collaborative process. Sort of how did you two first start collaborating? And then what was the process like on this particular book for you? Anything stand out from your memories about the way that you were able to bring this very contemporary Belarusian poetry into very contemporary English?
Well, I'll say for one, I was really just grateful to be along for this. This was a new experience for me and an exciting experience for me. And the collaboration, as I saw it, was kind of like, you know, how you can like run something. It was almost like running translations through Valzhyna and then running them through me, you know, because once we got, you know, because I don't know the language, but once I read her translations, and then it became a process of, okay, can you edit these translations or massage these translations into something that is close to how I am seeing this poem in the world. And so that was a real generous experience. And it was one that I think I was afforded so much trust, which I hope I did well by, because I was really surprised by, you know, by the ask to join this project. And I was really, I wanted to do right by it. And I think I had never collaborated in this way before, where it was, again, kind of like, here's how I believe the poem should live, or the language should live. Can we put our heads together and make it as beautiful as it can be? And that was really, I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed the process.
Thank you, Will, for that question. Yeah, I've known Julia for a very long time, right? And I've been translating her work for most of that time. But it felt like, like I'm flying an airplane and I do not know how to land it. And then the protests in Belarus began, the violence began, the tortures began. And a good friend who we have between all of us, Ilya Kaminsky, said, what can I do for Belarusian poets? And he came up with this project where American poets were invited to translate Belarusian poets, and Belarusian poets translated them. And so it was our idea to pair up Julia with Hanif. And so she was one of the Belarusian poets, and then Hanif was one of the American poets. And then we decided to do a Zoom together, Hanif and I, to go through these poems, to talk about what's expected in these translations. And I remember, I think it was like January, so kind of like today, and it was snowing in Ithaca. It was late when we were Zooming, and I was sitting in my work office on campus, and it's like so dark and quiet, and the snow is falling, and just Hanif's voice is coming from the laptop, and he's landing the airplane, and and he doesn't know it yet that he's landing the airplane that I've been flying for all these years, not knowing how to land it. And I just said quietly, and I thought, this is who I need. That if only I had Hanif working with me, I could do the book. We could do the book together. Because Julia has that kind of direct, precise, minimalist style in Belarusian, and she writes like she cuts with a sharp knife. And I needed somebody who could come and do that. I didn't have that kind of confidence when I was translating, and Hanif had that. And so he landed the play. And so I said, would you do it with me? And when he said yes, I knew it will have a book. We'll have a book, it will happen. Yes, so thank you so much, Hanif, and thank you, Julia, of course, for the beautiful, powerful work. And thank you, Will, for this powerhouse of a publishing house that you're running. It's really great. The work you're doing is amazing.
You guys are the star of the show. There's no publishing house without this, right? This is what it's about. And to be in publishing is about creating the platform for the voices to be heard, right? There should be the ghost in the machine. No one should ever see me or hear from me, ideally, right? But like Deep Ellum is special because people hear from me all the time. And I love to share this idea, which is that I think co-translation like this is something, I mean, it's alchemical, it's magical. It taps into the traditions that unite people in every corner of the world, right? In every language of the world. The spoken tradition of language is so powerful. And something that I really love is like, when we publish books from smaller languages, right? You mentioned there's not enough translators of Belarusian, right? Like this is a problem for a lot of languages in the world. And co-translation is a bridge for that, right? For poets and native speakers to get together and to work together in this way, to channel, like Hanif said, the words that are coming through, and then to rework them together in this beautiful collaboration. We've seen this happen. David Shook, who could not be here, works with poets in a lot of languages of which he's not exactly, or excuse me, they're not exactly a speaker, but they work with native speakers in this beautiful way to platform the original language and then to find its English equivalent. Like, how can we publish a book that says to you, not just that Julia essentially wrote this book in English, right? But that Belarusian, the original, has the power, and you need to meet the original, right? So that you can elevate the original, even as you elevate the translation. That's sort of like this, how do you do that in fiction? How do you do it in poetry? It doesn't happen with every translation, but in this book it happens. And in poetry, we often do what we did with this book, which is a bilingual presentation. And I love bilingual presentations because you get to see a language that you don't know most of the time, right? Like for me, I speak Russian, but I don't speak Belarusian. It's a different language. And I look at it and I'm like, it's off for me, but I get to see it and appreciate the beauty of the presentation of thoughts and words and art in another way. And so co-translation like this, I just want to come back to it. Like anyone listening, please do this with a friend, do this with a poet you look up to, do it in fiction, do it in nonfiction. Co-translation can do so much more for our field than I think it ever gets a lot of credit for. And we did a co-translation a couple of years ago between two professors at the University of Texas at Dallas. And one is a native speaker of German, and it was a translation of the great Goethe. And the English, she did it with a British a native poet named Frederick Turner. And Frederick is known for being a bit of a formal poet. He loves the form in all of its forms. And so she would read the original to him, and then he would go ba-ba, 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 ba-ba to try to just get a rhythm. And so my last question in the translation sort of portion here is, did the original play any role for you in your co-translation, Valzhyna, Hanif? Did you guys, Valzhyna, were you reading a bit of the original to make sure that sort of rhythm and everything? Because the preciseness is very precise, but to make sure you capture that.
Yeah, because I know Julia for a long time, and if we've done readings together, I know her voice well. I know how she reads, and so that's what we did. We read together, and I think that what we were getting at in the co-translation is the intonation. So it's not about translating only what the words communicate, because poetry is not just a piece of communication. I think poetry is also just an exclamation, right? And so that's all in the intonation. And so I think that's what came through when we were doing it together.
So to get, again, bridge that idea of the original and the translation, Julia, can you speak a little bit about, and Valzhyna as well, a little bit about Belarusian literature of the moment? And writing in Belarusian as sort of a political act, and if at all, any dialogue that's happening between Belarusian and Ukrainian writers. I mean, these countries, for those who don't know, I mean, they're neighbors. She mentioned Chernobyl is it's on basically the farthest north in Ukraine, right on the border with Belarus. But, most Americans don't have a firm grasp on this part of the world, right? And it goes to show that when you publish a Belarusian book, you're introducing people to a culture they're probably not familiar with before, right? And for us, you're a Belarusian writer in exile, as is your husband, as is Svetlana Alexievich, maybe the first Belarusian writer a lot of Americans would have met, though she didn't write in Belarusian. And so that was another choice. And so I just wondered if you could speak a little bit, this is the politics question, and how you see sort of writing in Belarusian as this act as you move forward. Do you plan to continue to do it, or you know English well enough? Do you want to continue developing your work in English, or both?
Thank you for this question, Will. Well, you speak about politics and language, and of course it's very important, but for me, that was not politics when I started writing in Belarusian. And actually I started translating poetry into Belarusian, and after translating a lot of American authors also, poets, I came to my own writing. I tried to try the language for that kind of poetry, as you know, even until recently and even now, a lot of Belarusian poets do rhyme, and it's normal to rhyme. I don't, and Valzhyna don't, and also there are a lot of people who are writing in free verse. So I started writing in the beginning 2010 or something, my own poetry, but I started translating a bit earlier. I I would say that most of the authors that write in Belarusian at the moment. So of course we have Russian writing authors, both poets and prose writers, but I would say they always feel a bit marginal, let's say. Though in Belarus, most of the population in their everyday life, most of the people speak Russian language, though they are bilingual. They speak both Russian, they can understand, at least they can read Belarusian and Russian. So it's a quite strange situation. But in Belarusian literature, I would say there are much more authors that write in Belarusian language. At the moment, of course, our literature is in a very problematic situation, as most of the independent publishing houses that publish Belarusian language literature have been closed down, and more on their way. And it becomes problematic to publish a book in Belarusian language in Belarus, and even abroad, and of course abroad, as these protests of publishing Belarusian books is only starting. I don't know, maybe Valzhyna will tell her story, as the question is so immense for me that I don't know where to from what side to take, but I will answer the second part of your question about Ukrainian and Belarusian poetry. And I would say that we've had a lot of contacts. My husband, Alger Bakharevich, his books also is available in English. And we've had a lot of friends, and we have a lot of friends in Ukraine. We've been a lot of times in Ukraine, and we took part in many Ukrainian festivals, of course, before the war was started by Russia. And we still keep these ties, though of course it has become a bit tricky with translations. I mean, we translate Ukrainian poetry into Belarusian language, but it's a very problematic question, but I would say that we still keep these ties, we still keep these contacts, and Belarusian and Ukrainian language are very close, and we can speak to each other. Belarusian and Ukrainian authors and just common people can speak to each other in their own languages, and we understand almost everything. This connection between Ukrainian and Belarusian language are closer than between Belarusian and Russian, or Russian and Ukrainian language, for example. So it's much easier for us to understand each other. Yeah. Sorry for my bit chaotic, but the question is so immense, I don't know where to start. Valzhyna, maybe you will add some sensible something sensible.
I just want to point out to Will that we have some really wonderful questions in the Q&A, so I don't want to miss them. I will just sum up and say that in Belarus, if you write in the Belarusian language or you speak Belarusian language, even saying the word hello immediately puts you on a political spectrum, and it is always viewed as a political decision whether you wish for it or not. Like Julia, I started writing in the Belarusian language when I was a very young person, and that decision was not political. It was just a way of writing in a language that was not the language of my teachers, that was not the language of my neighbors and my parents and everybody who had control over me, and everybody that I feared in some way as a Soviet girl child. But I found Belarusian language musical and also a kind of a mask. It was, available. But eventually you learn that when you use this language, you're viewed politically immediately, and sooner or later you will have to understand that whether you want it or not, you are swept into a historical political wave simply because you recognize this language as your own.
One of the questions had to do with the translation process. And so it's a two-parter. I'll go to Hanif first because we haven't heard from you in a minute. But then also we'll jump back to you, Julia, which is about the translation process. What sort of experience from the personal side, Hanif, were you able to bring to this, right? And I think too, of course, that the protests that happened in Belarus, one reason they didn't get very much play in the US was that this was the summer of the George Floyd protests in America. And so there was a global discontent. It was a time of lockdown, a time of fear, and it was a time of massive international protest. And when we publish books, like we're always looking for those intersections, right? To say like the dialogue that can happen internationally, right? Because these are two massive protests against abuses of power that were triggered by very different events. But there is something that links them kind of cosmically. And so were you able to bring any personal experience? And then Valzhyna, you could add to that as well, any additional personal experience, because we know you're Belarusian, but like there's so much more and you've known the poet forever. So Hanif, I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I do want to say, I mean, I was drawn to the work for its kind of articulation, or it's like a triptych through uprising. But one thing that was important for me, and I think remains important for me, at the same time as I was working on this book, I was working on editing a memoir by a writer named Prince Shakur. And there's a part of the memoir where he talks about going to Paris, or being in Paris during a protest and not knowing what to do, or not understanding how to be present in that protest, because it is different, right? It is a different place. I kind of want to be careful, even though it is the truth, I want to be careful about blanketing this idea of people uprising against power, because yes, sure, but there are intricacies in the way protests unfold, and there are different realities and different things at stake for people protesting in different places. And I think working on, of course, I knew that and I understood that, even as someone who has protested in many ways since I was a child, I knew and understood that. But I think it's around 2020, it was perhaps easy to lose sight of that, because what many of us saw were global uprisings, and they all seemed equally yoked, right? Equally tied together. And in a way, of course, protest is a global language, but the stakes of protest, the stakes of my protesting in America, in Ohio, are different from the stakes of protests unfolding in this book. And it felt important to honor that. And it felt important to be honest with myself about that as well. Because otherwise, I don't think I could do the translations justice if I kind of just thought like, oh, okay, well, a book about protests, you know, there's a lot, the stakes are different. And because the stakes are different, the work takes on a heightened approach. And I think, you know, I was always, of course, going to approach the work with care and with thoughtfulness, but I think spending time with it and spending time with, I'm a big researcher, you know, so it's not like I was just looking at the poems and being like, okay, let's do this. I was also, you know, I read about these protests, and I read about the history of the protest. So, you know, I really wanted to not project too much of my understanding of what protest is onto this work, because it's different, and the stakes are different, and the outcomes of those high stakes are very clearly different. And so I wanted to honor that.
And then Julia, in the actual translation process, one question that both David Shook and our audience had was your role in the translation process. You know English, you wrote some of this in English, but what role did you play in sort of working with the translators when they've sort of delivered you the work and everything like that?
Well, I would say that I gave my translators freedom. And we discussed, of course, I read the translations, and I also discussed them mostly with Valzhyna. But also we took part in that event together with Hanif. You know, it's a bit Belarusian. I would say there are readers are ready for different kind of poetry. I don't know. I would give my translators freedom because American readers are also used to certain kind of poetry, maybe that and Belarusian, sorry. It also about expectations. What is considered to be poetry? What can be considered poetic? And sometimes Valzhyna put away some lines, for example, from my poetry. Sometimes I insisted on returning them back and asking them, no, I want that back. But sometimes okay, let's put it away. The ending, for example, maybe it seemed too dramatic for Valzhyna and maybe for American reader, too pathetic maybe, but for example, for Belarusian, but at the same time for Belarusian reader, that could be okay, you know. So it's also, and it's a very complicated topic, maybe for the whole discussion, how we perceive poetry in translation and how should we translate poetry in order for to be understood by the readers in your own language, in your own country. So yeah, that's why I decided no. Sometimes something that were crucial for me, that were of the most importance, I asked Valzhyna to put that back. But sometimes I said, okay, yeah, I agree. Yeah, let's have it out, for example.
Yeah, it really helps that Julia could not only read our translations, but also that she's well read in the English tradition, so that she has translated poetry from English herself. And so she understands that we're not only translating words from one language into another, but we're also translating the idea of a poem from one language to another, and also the idea and the intonation of Julia's particular poem from one tradition into another. So Julia mentioned earlier that most of Belarusian poetry is still, well, not is still, but is very lyrically sentimental, often requires a rhyme to be recognized as a poem, and often has the quality of something that is there to comfort rather than to stir, for instance. And Julia's poetry is a stirring kind of poetry in the Belarusian tradition today. Am I right, Julia? Yeah, it's not a kind of a poetry that has come to comfort. It's a kind of a poetry that comes to awaken and to stir. And it's very openly unrhymed, but it's interested in rhythm and in the texture of words, in the echoes, musical echoes between words. And it's very in your face, in the Belarusian regional, untraditional. Now, in the American tradition, to write free verse and to think of rhythm is not that avant-garde and untraditional. So when we think of being cutting with a knife, the lines cut with a knife, when we think about being in your face and laconic, we require in English an extra step sometimes in some poems. And so that's how I would explain some of those extra cuttings sometimes that we would take, because in English, that's how we would translate the intonation. But always I listened to Julia, and when she would say, oh, this is why it's important, and I would say, yes, I hear you. And so it's a three-way collaboration really here. And we, very brave, will to do the bilingual edition side by side. This is also us saying, we know what we've done and we stand by it. And so somebody can open the book, and even without knowing Belarusian, even without understanding Cyrillic letters, could see that somewhere some stanzas do not coincide line by line, for instance. And so we stand by that. And that was a kind of a decision where we are translating a poem into English, not a microwave instruction booklet. Don't worry, your toast is not going to burn. but we want something to burn in your heart, in your head, right, in your guts. That's what we are going for there.
If I could quote that, I think we might put that on a Deep Vellum shirt, because I think that that's like the mantra, that's the mission, you know, like it reminds me of the line from Donald Barthelme. It said, like, literature should be a strange object covered with fur that breaks your heart, which is a very different way of putting it, but no less beautiful. There are so many good questions in the chat, and we're also sort of running out of time. And so I encourage these three amazing collaborators to continue this discussion in what the Q&A hasn't really gotten to yet, but you were getting to there at the end, Valzhyna, which is about the poetic tradition that this work ties into, both the inspiration, the musicality, dialogues with other world literatures that helped make it happen. Julia, you know, you are so well read, you are familiar with so many traditions, and you've distilled that into a really interesting presentation that these translators have captured in English. And so I just want to thank everyone again for reading, for your thoughtful responses. We could do this all day. In fact, we should probably do it again. You know, this is just the start of a conversation. And I just want to remind the viewers at home that publishing as an act is a really long process. And so this protest diary was written in 2020, and it is now January 2023, 2.5 years later, and the book had really just came out. And you know, recently it also got a full-page review in the New York Times Book Review, which I just am saying this out loud. It's not bragging, but to say that this is a special book. Books of poetry, you don't usually get a full page in the New York Times Book Review, but it's a testament to a great work of art that was written in the heat of a political moment from a poet with her poetry tied into a much longer time frame and tradition, but that is as relevant today as the day it was written, and can teach us a lot about ourselves, our current condition, where we are in the world, as well as where others are in the world. And that's what great art can do. And it's a testament to these two astounding translators who are both extraordinary poets in the English language in their own right. And so this is a real dream project. And I want to thank Pierce and Brookline Booksmith for continuing to do the Transnational Literature Series. This is special, and this is what it's about. These dialogues that can go into the art, can go into the line by line, can speak from the 1,000-foot view of the way that art can impact us in the world. And so I wanted to just, that's my way of saying thank you all for being here, but I wanted to give you each just a chance to say bye and thank you real quick before we pass it back off to Pierce.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I have just endless gratitude for being able to work on this project. This is unlike anything I've ever done. And it is something that I did not think I would ever be asked to do, and the amount of trust that I had with these poems was, I just learned so much, and I'm thankful to have the opportunity, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the collaborators. Will, you mentioned the relevance of the book, and I feel it very strongly right now during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, how Belarus is often sidelined and misunderstood. And it only speaks to the fact of how little often people on the outside understood what was happening in Belarus in the first place. And so I think that there is a great relevance, in fact, to this diary today, to the understanding of what is happening in this triangle between Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus in this past year.
And I'm also very grateful to for this event, for having me here, and for listening my translators, Hanif and Valzhyna, and listening to my publisher as well. We see each other for the first time. So thank you, and thank you for your beautiful questions. We haven't been able to answer all of them, but I think you can find me, I don't know, on Facebook and ask them if you are so much interested. Thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I loved Will's comment about at magic, alchemy, the sort of things that came together to make this book, and they definitely transferred to this event too. So I'm very grateful to you all and to everyone for joining us. Thank you for the lovely comments in the chat and your deep, deep engagement. And I say goodbye to you all.